Senator Patterson, you've got the call.
Thank you, Chair. I was reflecting, listening to your evidence before, that another of the contrasts between the way in which Australia operates in these exercises in international waters, whether it's the South China Sea or elsewhere, and the way that the PLAN has operated in our region, is that I presume, and correct me if I'm wrong, Admiral, when we are shadowing their task group, we do so in a safe and professional manner.
We do.
It's not always the case when we are in the South China Sea that the PLA, whether it's their Navy or their Air Force, operates in a safe and professional manner, is it?
That has been our experience. That's right. That it is not always the case.
Correct. And quite recently, in fact, we had an example of that on the 11th of February, didn't we?
Yes, you're referring to the Maritime Patrol Aircraft, the P8 incident?
Yes. Why don't you describe what happened?
We had a P8 deployed for conducting surveillance in the South China Sea. I think the incident that you are referring to was on one of the patrols it conducted on the 11th of February. On this occasion, and I would say we have interactions with PLA forces routinely, but on this particular day, the P8, as it was conducting its patrol, was intercepted by a Chinese fighter jet, and on one occasion on that intercept there was a release of flares, which is commonly used by aircraft as a means of drawing attention, but on this occasion that release of flares occurred, in our view, much too close to our aircraft. That presented a safety risk to the aircraft.
And this PLA Air Force jet, was it a J-16?
Yes.
Was this incident within Chinese airspace?
So we were operating under what we define, consistent with the law of the sea, in international, so on the high seas.
Yep.
Outside of territorial waters, as Australia recognises.
In other words, it was not in Chinese airspace?
No.
Was the P8 operating consistent with international law?
Yes.
When was the Minister first briefed on this P8 incident?
So the incident occurred on the 11th of February. The aircraft was operating late in the day. The Minister was first briefed by me at 8:45 on the following morning.
So that was the 12th of February?
12th of February.
And the Prime Minister?
I do not know when the Prime Minister was first briefed, but I was part of a briefing with the Deputy Prime Minister and to the Prime Minister on the morning of the 13th of February.
Okay. Do you have the time for that briefing?
It was mid-morning, 10:35.
Was that an NSC?
No, it was directly to the Prime Minister.
Have you briefed NSC on this incident?
I think the Minister has previously indicated I wouldn't reveal the nature of briefings that I or others would provide to NSC.
You did reveal it, though, in relation to the Tasman Sea incident, so why won't you in relation to this incident?
Apologies, I'm not sure that is the evidence.
Pardon me, Minister, I didn't hear you.
Well, I can ask the official to the CDF to clarify, but I don't believe that is.
I don't believe I did answer that directly.
You said, I asked, have you briefed NSC, and you said no. In relation to the Tasman Sea incident. Right. And then the Minister subsequently jumped in and said, we don't talk about NSC except when we do talk about NSC. So should I take it from this that NSC has not been briefed on the P8 incident?
I've indicated that I'm not prepared to canvass the content of discussions at NSC in this forum, Senator.
Just at press conferences by the Prime Minister, that's more appropriate, I guess. Okay, what representations has the Australian government made to the Chinese government about this incident?
Bernard Phillip, First Assistant Secretary, International Policy. We made representations on the 12th of February to China's Defence Attaché in Canberra. Later that day, Australia's Defence Attaché in Beijing made representations to the PLA in Beijing. Also later that day, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade made representations to China's embassy in Canberra.
Can you share what the Chinese response was to those representations?
Senator, we wouldn't normally go into the details of our communications with partners, but I can assure you that we expressed significant concern about the unsafe and unprofessional conduct displayed by the PLA and conveyed our expectation that China would investigate the incident. We noted that it was not the type of interaction we expected to have with a professional armed force.
Mm-hmm. What's your expectation of the investigation? I doubt they will find it's an accident, given that it's happened so many times. It's clearly deliberate, isn't it?
Senator, we have a regular dialogue with the Chinese government, with the People's Liberation Army, on our expectations of their behaviour, because there have been a number of incidents over the past 12 to 18 months that Defence has assessed are unsafe and unprofessional. This has been a regular feature of our discussion.
But the implication that they should do an investigation implies that a PLA Air Force pilot's gone rogue or done something that wasn't planned or directed. Is there any reason to believe that's the case, given it's happened so often?
Senator, just Hugh Jeffrey, Deputy Secretary of Strategy, Policy Industry. We won't obviously comment on Chinese intent. They can speak for themselves. The question, of course, is you'll be aware in the broad that large swaths of the territory in the South China Sea have been claimed by China under historical rights, and the questions, the nature of the dialogue with the PRC in relation to our presence in the South China Sea is all on the basis of those claims, and their activity is justified on the basis of those claims. And of course, we base our interpretation of international law under agreed precedents, and we are confident that at all times our aircraft operate in international airspace and sea lanes.
It's not just our interpretation, though, is it?
No, Senator. It's based on the UN Court of the Law of the Sea and agreed principles around international law that govern airspace and international seaways.
Can I test this proposition of the word of choice, which we've frequently used, that this is unprofessional? Unprofessional implies that it is something that's rogue or perhaps due to poor training or poor command and control. But there's no reason to believe that that's the reason why this is occurring, is it? It's a very deliberate act that's occurred on multiple occasions, as Mr Jeffrey said, to assert China's interests about its interpretation of international law.
That we've characterised it as unsafe and unprofessional, and I just both characterisations. The reason that they operate in that way is open to the judgment, deliberate or accidental. We don't know what that is the case, but we do not consider the conduct to be that which we would expect of professional military forces in the way they operate in close company with each other.
And that is a view that is, of course, endorsed and communicated by the government. We have been very clear in our condemnation of these behaviours publicly and directly.
How many times have incidents like this happened in the last couple of years?
To be confident in the answer, Senator, I would have to check that. You would recall we had an incident that occurred in 2022, also involving a maritime patrol aircraft. We've had incidents where the Chinese vessel activated its sonar near one of our vessels when they had divers in the water. Similar circumstance where flares were released near a naval helicopter that was operating. So over the last few years, we have had a number of incidents of this nature. Not
to add to your list too much, but in addition to the flares instance, there's been an incident with chaff as well, released into the flight path of a P-8.
That's the circumstance I was referring to of 3 years ago.
Yep, and there's been an instance of the lasing of a P-8 from a Chinese naval vessel. I believe that was in the Arafura Sea.
That's correct. Yes, that's right.
So half a dozen times at least over the last few years?
Yes.
And of course, this activity is not only directed at the Australian military. Some of our partner militaries have had similar experiences in the region, haven't they?
They have.
So how likely do you think it is that this has happened that frequently and it's accidental?
I think it's less likely than likely. I think that there is messaging occurring from the PLA on its capabilities and its intent.
And so if it is intentional and not accidental, and these are highly trained, highly capable pilots using highly capable platforms, it's not really just unsafe and unprofessional, is it? It's worse than that.
In what manner are you referring to, Senator?
Well, it's very deliberate. I would say it's provocative. It's reckless. Do you think they're fair descriptions?
I think unsafe and unprofessional covers much of that which you have described, and it's clearly signalling an intent in those circumstances where it is not accidental, but we cannot be clear on each of the events whether that's the case.
And it's intimidatory as well, isn't it?
But it is intended to send a message to the Australian units that are operating there, and of course then to the Australian government generally. Did
the Deputy PM and Defence Minister direct any particular response Defence should take in this instance?
Sorry, you're still referring to the
most recent incident?
The P8? So there was a statement released, there was a information provided to journalists to provide them with context, and I'm very conscious that the Deputy Prime Minister also made public statements on the matter.
Yes, but my question wasn't what has happened, but what has the Minister directed you to do? Has the Minister directed you to take any particular response to this incident?
I wouldn't reveal the direction of the Minister to me. The Minister provides regular direction for me, and I act on that direction when it's provided.
Okay. To your knowledge, has the Minister made any representations to his counterpart?
Senator, as Mr Phillip indicated, we've raised the issue at all levels, so that is political and official and mill-to-mill. And that occurs routinely when we have incidences such as these, and most recently, of course, when the Vice Chief and I were in Beijing for Defence Strategic Dialogue talks with PLA counterparts.
I'll come to that in a second. So, but at all levels, does that mean the Prime Minister's raised it with his counterpart?
Senator, the last political engagement that I'm aware of is with the Foreign Minister, who engaged with her Chinese counterpart in South Africa.
That's a level, it's not all levels.
Well, I'm sorry, Senator, when I say all levels, I'm referring to political, official and military.
Right. So so the Foreign Minister's made representations about it. Has the Defence Minister made representations about it?
The Defence Minister has made public comments about it, which
yes,
I'm sure you're well aware of. And as the official has indicated, appropriately, this has been raised politically, it has been raised diplomatically, and it's been raised in the context of our military relations.
And among those representations, has it included a representation from the Minister of Defence for Australia to his counterpart?
I've been very clear about the approach we've taken, and Minister Marles has made a number of public statements about this. The Australian government has been very clear, and China could not be in any doubt about the position we take in relation to this incident. That is true also of the other incidents where we have raised our concerns. We approach this in a really methodical way. We condemn unsafe behaviour. The safety of our personnel is paramount, and we will call it out when we see it. And we utilise the channels that are available to us, in this instance, the Foreign Minister, diplomatic arrangements and military arrangements. I will make the observation that that is possible because we do have channels of communication available to us of that kind. That wasn't always possible under the previous government. It has been under this one, and we're determined to use them to raise our interests in this context in a predictable, calm and considered way.
Minister, you said you've been clear. Perhaps it's just me, but it's not clear to me from your answer whether or not the Minister for Defence has raised it with his counterpart.
I've been clear about what has occurred.
But not what hasn't occurred, so we should assume it hasn't occurred?
The Foreign Minister has made representations, and there have been a range of other representations which the officials have stepped you through just now, and that is appropriate and consistent with the overall approach that we take to handling these issues in a considered way, using the channels that are available to us.
Normally when we ask questions in this forum about the things that the Foreign Minister might have done or not done, we're told we can't ask it in this forum and we should ask that in tomorrow in Foreign Affairs estimates. But you've been very candid about what the Foreign Minister has done, but you're here representing the Defence Minister. What I'm seeking to understand is what has the Defence Minister done about this?
Well, the Foreign Minister and her actions have been made publicly, so I'm comfortable referring to those. I will direct you to her tomorrow if you have more detailed questions about the approach that was taken.
Will she be able to tell me?
The officials have stepped you through the range of ways that this has been communicated to China, and the underlying proposition is this, that the safety of our personnel is paramount. We condemn behaviour that jeopardises that safety, and we are willing to call that out when behaviour falls short of our expectations.
Will the Foreign Minister be able to tell me tomorrow what representations the Defence Minister has made?
Senator, you can ask questions as you wish to the Foreign Minister.
Right. So, but this is my opportunity to ask questions of the Defence Minister.
And I've answered your question.
Sorry, I hadn't finished my question,
times.
Minister. I hadn't finished my question.
You may not have answered. Well, please ask another question.
Thank you. This is my opportunity, only opportunity, to ask questions of you representing the Defence Minister. There have now been several serious safety incidents involving the PLA, and we are none the wiser what, if anything, the Defence Minister has raised directly with his counterparts. You've pointed to public statements and you've pointed to activities of other ministers, but the Minister for Defence and our Deputy Prime Minister is responsible for the ADF and for his relationship with his counterpart. So unless you're able to point to something that he's done or said, am I to assume that he has done nothing to make representations directly to his counterpart?
I wouldn't characterise it that way at all, because the government's response has been explained to you. And as Mr Jeffrey characterised it, it encompasses political representation, diplomatic representation and military-to-military representation, and that is appropriate. It contrasts with the approach that occurred under the previous government, where many of those channels were not available because the preference from the previous government was public chest beating rather than actual communication directly about the issues of concern to us and the issues that are in our national interest.
Okay, so as I understand it, this incident occurred on the afternoon or the evening of the 11th of February. The Minister was briefed on the morning of the 12th of February. The Prime Minister was briefed on the morning of the 13th of February. So the Minister was briefed on the Wednesday, the Prime Minister was briefed on the Thursday. Why didn't the Defence Minister disclose this to the Parliament while it was sitting?
Well, Senator, there is a process that this government goes through when an incident of this kind occurs, and officials can talk a little more about the factors that they consider, but in the first instance it involves confirming the nature of the incident, and that was what occurred in this instance. In the second case, it involves providing those direct communications to partners, and that occurred also in this instance.
So it was just convenient that the first opportunity for it to be publicly disclosed was half an hour after the question time finished on a Thursday afternoon in an exclusive interview with Kieran Gilbert on Sky News. There was no earlier opportunity to disclose it.
It is consistent with a handling approach that sees us evaluate the circumstances, gain a factual understanding that we are confident in about what has occurred, and provides us with an opportunity to communicate directly about the issue. That is the approach that was taken on this occasion.
CDF, when were the facts confirmed in this instance?
Senator, if I could just give you some insight. So the aircraft performed its patrol on the afternoon of the 11th of February. It needed to complete its mission. It returned back to its operating base. The crew obviously went through a debrief and evaluation with the deployed commander of the circumstances. That information was provided overnight, and in the morning the Joint Operations Command a similar evaluation to look at it and precedents or other elements of it. I received it on that morning and wanted to be satisfied, because it's a very important judgment about the characterisation of the event. I got first-hand knowledge through the course of that morning of the nature of the activity. We and I formed a judgment that it was unsafe and unprofessional in the early afternoon of Wednesday the 12th.
So you were sufficiently confident to brief the Minister on the morning of the 12th. You formed confidence about the events on the afternoon of the 12th. You briefed the Prime Minister on the morning of the 13th. And when did you notify our partners?
The part of the judgment then of once we had formed a view of the nature of the incident, as the Minister's outlined, we particularly the process of communicating to Chinese officials occurred, and that was part of us making sure we represented the issue and understood whether there were any elements that they may communicate back that were relevant to the advice or the view that we would form. Partners, some of whom actively monitor operations with us when we are operating in the South China Sea, are aware an incident occurred, but the formal classification becomes distributed once we've formed a view and we have advised our ministers of what our judgments are.
So that's not really clear in terms of timing from my point of view. When did you communicate with your Chinese counterparts specifically?
On the early evening, so 6 p.m. on the 12th of February is when we first made representations to China's Defence Attaché here in Canberra.
Okay. And what about our like-minded partners, for example, the United States, who I assume you're alluding to, who monitor these things?
The United States we communicate with regularly on these matters. I don't have the particular time, but they are a part of our operational framework when we're operating in these circumstances, and would have been aware that an incident had occurred not long after it did and would have waited for us to provide clarifying insights into the nature of that event.
Which you did when?
I don't have that time, Minister.
No one at the table has that time? No. Okay, so we can say that by 10:35am on the 13th, which is the Wednesday, you were sufficiently confident about this matter to brief the Prime Minister, and you'd also made representations to that your Chinese counterparts and our other like-minded partners had been kept abreast throughout. So really it was open to the Prime Minister or the Deputy Prime Minister to publicly disclose this at any point after that, wasn't it?
So just to be clear, my discussion with the Deputy Prime Minister occurred on the Thursday, the 13th.
Sorry, Thursday the 13th. So at any point onwards from Thursday the 13th at 10:35am, it was open to the Prime Minister or Deputy Prime Minister to disclose this publicly, wasn't it?
Senator, the process has been stepped through for you a number of times now. I mean, there is early advice that an incident has occurred. There is the process that the CDF has explained to you of making representations to counterparts here and in Beijing. There is then a further conversation. The government has moved in a orderly and I think timely way to process this consistent with a sensible approach to handling. There are other examples, like in the government that you were part of, where a 2-day turnaround was in the order of what transpired before it was made public. This is not unusual. This is the government working with Defence to make sure that we handle this in a calm and considered way and we make the necessary representations to counterparts.
Was any briefing provided to the opposition about this incident before it was made public?
To whom?
The opposition?
Not that I'm aware of, Senator. No.
All right. What about in relation to the Tasman Sea incidents?
We'll need to move the call around. But
Okay, well, can we just end that on that question?
Yeah, we will.
Has the opposition been briefed on the Tasman Sea incidents?
No, not that I'm aware of.
All right.
Thanks, Chair.
Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. When did the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister last speak to his Chinese counterpart?
Senator Hugh Jeffrey, Deputy Secretary, Strategy, Policy and Industry. From memory, Senator, the last formal in-person interaction was at the Shangri-La dialogue where the Deputy Prime Minister had a bilateral with the Chinese Defence Minister Li Shangfu.
When was the Shangri-La dialogue?
That would have been in the first week of July.
Yes, sorry, Bernard Phillip, First Assistant Secretary, International Policy, late May, early June last year.
Okay.
And I think it was actually the subsequent Defence Minister Admiral Dong Jun.
Right, so May, June 2024 was the last time he had an in-person meeting with his defence counterpart, then defence counterpart.
That's my recollection, yes.
Has there been a telephone call or a video hookup or any other means of communication since then?
Not that I recall, no. So, no.
No? Right, okay. I think we can say then with high confidence that the 11 February P8 incident in the South China Sea, no direct representations have been made by the Defence Minister to his counterpart, as I was trying to elucidate earlier. Minister, your evidence was that the Deputy Prime Minister publicly addressed this as part of his Sky News interview, but you also said that this government is not engaging in megaphone diplomacy. Wouldn't you want to take advantage of the access that you now have to your Chinese counterparts and directly raise these concerns rather than doing so through the media?
Well, you are quite right that this government is able to have a direct conversation when necessary with counterparts, and that was not the case in the previous government. As I understand it, in the previous term there were no phone calls, no meetings, because that wasn't the approach taken by the previous administration. We've had an extended discussion this morning already about in this particular incident, the range of ways that we've communicated with China about our expectations. I don't think I can add to that evidence, Senator.
Well, it is true that the Chinese government for a period in the last term refused to engage with the Australian government, but that reflects on them, not on us. And it was not for the entirety of the last term, and certainly not for the entirety of the previous government's term in office. In fact, ministers visited China within the last term of Parliament. But to your point, Minister, if you've now have access to these avenues, why has the Defence Minister not used them to make representations about serious safety incidents involving ADF personnel?
The government takes the opportunities before us to make these communications, and I think we've been very clear that in this most recent example, you can see political, diplomatic and military channels all being used to communicate our view about what's taken place.
Just not by the Minister responsible for the ADF. Thank you, Chair. Senator Fawcett has further questions.